Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss some things in an interview Nigel Farage carried out with The Standard, in which surely the highlight was where he said that Reform UK were a non-racist party and then proceeded to prove it by saying something incredibly racist. But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So Farage carried out an interview with The Standard as part of his drive to win over Londoners. Let's begin with Reform UK and racism, because that's a big thing. Nigel Farage insists the party aren't racist. Yet, there's loads of footage of Reform UK activists and candidates saying incredibly racist things, including someone who worked as part of his personal campaign to win Clacton. Every time the footage come out, Farage has to disown them, of course. Oh, you're not representative, no, nothing to do with me. But there comes a point where you have to remark that if Reform UK aren't a racist party, why do they attract all the racists? Sometimes they even try to claim that it's a mole sent to discredit the party. Remember they did that with one of their activists during the election campaign. I even get similar comments on the channel. So when I discussed the accidental outing of a far-right account on Twitter earlier this week, some poor lamb responded saying, no, it must have been a left-winger trying to make right-wingers look bad. Bless their cotton socks. And also, what is Farage doing to root these racists out? Like a few years ago, there was intense scrutiny of Labour's process of dealing with anti-Semitism and to a lesser extent, Islamophobia. And I'm not aware that a single journalist has even asked Reform UK what they're doing out to root the racists out of the party when it's clearly a problem. You know, there are too many to simply dismiss as an individual who's not representative of the party. But then there's Farage himself. So, sang Hitler Youth songs, was known for fully embracing the neo-Nazi life in his youth. Can't even say he's grown out of it because he was photographed meeting a group of neo-Nazis recently in the byline, or as described in the Byline Times. And even this interview shows his racist side. He said, and I quote, "I need to reassure Londoners that we are genuinely this non-sectarian, non-racist party." Now, of course, the reason he needs to reassure them is because people see it as a racist party. But anyway, he was asked, so what's the worst aspect of London? And he said, again, I quote, because it's crucial, "Parts of it are unrecognisable as being English." Unrecognisable as being English. Note, he doesn't say that there are some people living in London who are English, which would just be plain old xenophobia. Unrecognisable was the word he used. In other words, it's a visual thing. Also note, he doesn't say British. No, English. Has to be English. Not even that fella who plays the bagpipes near Westminster Square. No, he's not allowed. Sorry, he's Scottish. Yes, not English. He looks around London and it doesn't look English. Now, how does something not look? It's not saying it's not English. He's saying it doesn't look English. Now, I would love some of his fanboys in the comments to give me an interpretation of that sentence that isn't racist. I might even read out the funniest in a future video if they're good. But in the meantime, I'm going to suggest that if you're complaining that a place doesn't look English, you are in fact deeply racist. So he says he needs to reassure people that Reform UK isn't racist, then instantly does a racism. And that was him trying not to be racist. That was him putting on his best effort, trying not to be racist. Can you imagine what he's like behind closed doors with his Nazi pals? Then one of the linchpins of his political narrative, he said that the population explosion is the single biggest problem we've got. What population explosion? Well, I've done this recently, but let's look at this so-called population explosion. First of all, the population increase is a little higher over the last 10 years than it was during the 1960s when he was born, and that's the heyday he wants to go back to, he says. But the last 10 years saw a smaller increase than the previous 10 years. In the last 10 years, population grew 7%, it was almost 8% before. But more importantly, because he's talking about the here and now. So we're talking about what's the projection for the next 10 years? That the population will grow by less than 5%. That is a big problem for our economy, actually. The practical implications aside, however, what we don't have is a population explosion. We actually have a sharp decline in the rate of population growth, in fact. So far from it being our biggest problem, the population explosion doesn't actually exist. Bizarrely, Farage tried to link poor GDP with a higher population. Oh, yeah, this population grown too much. That's why we've got low GDP. What? He didn't even say GDP per capita, just GDP. This just shows the way populists like him work. On no level does it make sense. How do you blame low productivity on having too many workers? Imagine telling a business owner that, oh, it's no wonder your productivity is rubbish. You've got too many people doing the work. Halve them and your productivity will magically double. Economists from all quarters have been very clear. The only growth we've had at all in the UK for years is from immigration. That is because our own birth rate is in full reverse. The British-born population is declining. And that's what Nigel, I'm not a racist, honest Farage doesn't like. That just as with the only population growth we're getting is largely from people who aren't white, because he's a racist. And if we implemented his policies, this country would become much poorer. But Farage can get away with saying things which make no sense if you think about them, because he's not inviting people to think about them, but to feel about them. The target of the populist is not the head, but the heart. Finally, just to comment on one of the digs he had at the Conservatives. I mean, there was lots of things in the interview. It would take hours to go through it all. But he said he did the Conservatives a favour by forcing Cameron to include the referendum in his manifesto, that he wouldn't have won without it. And you're thinking, of the many claims he made about the Conservatives, this is clearly the most doubtful. Let's look at the facts. The inclusion of the referendum was supposed to hold off UKIP, to block them, to cut the feet from under them. But UKIP won a huge share of the vote, 12.6%, which was way bigger than they ever had before or ever did since. Now, it's not quite up to Reform's haul last year, but not very far off. It's pretty marginal, especially when you take turnout into account. So UKIP voters, or UKIP, sorry, as a party, took lots of votes from the Conservatives despite the manifesto promise. UKIP still had by far and away their best ever result. The Conservatives only won slightly more votes and a slightly greater share of the vote than in 2010. It wasn't even 1% extra. The reason the Conservatives won was because the Liberal Democrat vote collapsed as core supporters deserted them over austerity. And because the Conservatives were in second place in those seats, and because of our first past the post system, they won them by default. The Conservatives did not benefit in the election from the referendum promise. It led to a chain of events whereby once they'd implemented it, they'd actually put it into practice, they took the heaviest defeat in a history going back to about 2 centuries, but realistically as the party 2.5 centuries. And now people are seriously asking if the party can even rebuild, including Farage. I personally think it will merge with Reform UK in time, just as it did in Canada, and it will be a different party. So with Farage saying he did the Tories a favour, it's almost like adding insult to injury. He's good at that. During the interview, he even said himself he doesn't know what the Conservatives stand for. Now, obviously, it's standard for political leaders to say that they don't know what all other parties stand for, because accusing them of not having a political philosophy is how you undermine them. He is the same of Starmer. It's a textbook party politics tactic. But I can tell him what the Conservative Party stands for now. Used to stand for small state free markets. Used to have a political philosophy. One I strongly disagreed with, but it was there. But because of Nigel Farage, what happened to them? They ended up turning into a big state, albeit a privatised one, and restricted trade, albeit without actually raising standards. But the Tories can't embrace that. They can't admit to being big state, restricted trade. So they're stuck now with a completely different political philosophy. Survival. That's it. That's their overriding philosophy now. They just want to survive as a political force. In pursuit of that philosophy, they will sacrifice any guiding principles in order to get favourable headlines the next day. All of their policies are up for grabs. They will change them the following week to keep chasing those headlines. And Farage did that to them, although they did choose to let him. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.